Hey UX community, let's jump in and pick up where we left off from last time. Last time I cut it a little bit short just because, as I've said before, I don't want these things to get too long. I want them to stay in small bite-sized chunks that are easy to consume. However, we talked about buttons and how to make responsive buttons, but we didn't really get into any of the interactivity that you can do in Figma. And so I think with this one, what we'll do is we'll kind of cover off on an intro to interactive and show you how to put interactivity into your components and potentially how to start to build things out in Figma. Maybe we'll do a little dummy nav for our little pseudo design system here. At some point I will talk with you guys also about organization, because you guys may have seen other design systems out there and maybe you've noticed that, you know, oftentimes design systems are organized in a way where they're organized via page. So for this particular, if we go up here and we look at our pages menu, so there's a reason why I'm doing this way, why I'm putting all of this in a single page. And I'll sort of explain that at some point and get into how you could organize this by pages if you want. The reason I'm doing it this way is because I want to be able to build a navigation here, and I want to be able to say, okay, this is going to be, let's say this is going to be a public facing version of our design system, and we want to be able to allow someone to come in here and view this as a prototype and to be able to click through it and that kind of thing. And where you run into problem with pages, when your design system gets huge, you're going to want to start to organize by pages probably. But where you're going to run into problems with pages is that with pages, you cannot link between them. So if you decided you wanted a customer-facing version of your design system, you might need to then say, okay, well, I'm going to have to build out this copy a bunch of stuff over into a single page like this so that I could actually build a navigation structure between them. There's currently, as far as I know, I don't know, Figma's pretty good about releasing some new features quietly. There's a few things they've released recently that I ran into that surprised me. So it's possible that they've released something and I just haven't seen it yet, but you can't really navigate between pages. You can't say, okay, I want to click from here over to some other page and some other piece in that page, as far as I'm aware. So let's just call this. Let's go over here to our pages menu here. And if your pages menu is not open, it might be collapsed like this. So if you just go up here and see here in the top right of this box, you'll see page 1. There's a little down arrow. Just click that, it'll show your pages. You can go in here and you can add whatever pages you want. You can add as many as you'd like, do whatever you want to do with them. Organize it however you want to organize it. But again, for the purposes of this sort of initial phase of this tutorials, I'm going to stick with just the single page, and we're going to do everything with inside of this single page using frames. So we'll just call this public facing design system or something like that, right? You can call it whatever you want, or maybe it's your actual design system. But you might want to actually, like I said, put these things, like you might have a grid page and a colors page and a fonts page. Like when your design system starts to get very complex and starts to get very mature, it starts to make more sense to use pages to organize it. But let's jump in and take a look at our button, and let's get into what we're here to talk about today, which is an introduction to interactivity. Because last time we talked about doing these buttons and making them responsive and all of that good stuff, but we didn't really get into interactive. I felt like the video was starting to drag on a little bit, and I wanted to kind of just cut it short with our button created. So we had created these different states. So currently we have an on state, we have a hover state, and we have a default state. So now if we wanted to do some interactivity, of course you're going to want to build some kind of interactivity into these. I don't typically build a lot of interactivity into my buttons, for obvious reasons. You want to sort of allow that, whoever your end users are, you want your team to be able to come in and decide where they want these buttons to link to and that kind of thing. But I do like to put at least bare minimum. I like to connect the hover state for them so that the hover is already built into the button and they don't have to mess with that. So if we go in here to our current buttons, let's go ahead and let's select our default state. And then if you go over here to the right, you'll see over here you've got some different panels here. You've got inspect, design, and prototype. And prototype's where we're going to want to be. Once you select this item, you'll see that you'll get these little points that appear when you roll over different parts of the button. And so these will allow you to connect. All you need to do is just select this, drag, and connect down here to this secondary, which is our hover state here, the second button, and just let go of that and it will automatically make that connection for you. The other thing you can do, if for any reason you're struggling with this or you're having any problems or Figma's acting up on you, let's go over here to our prototype panel and you can see where interactions is at. Let's go ahead and delete that connection we just made. And then there's this interactions menu. So if you go in here and select anything in here and then click this interaction, it will add an interaction to that element that you have selected. And then you could go in here and you could start to edit from there too. So if for any reason the click and drag and drop thing is acting up on you, or whatever the case may be, I just want you to know, as with anything in Figma, there's more than one way to achieve a result. So we could go in here and we could say, okay, we want to do whatever we want to do in here. On click, we want to navigate to, change to, etc. There's all these different choices in here. In this particular case, we'd want to say change to, and then we want to change to our primary button, and we want to change to our hover state. So you'll see then it made that connecting line for you once you got enough information for it to know what you're trying to do. Now, it seems as though Figma has made instant the automatic animation for this now, which is fantastic because I used to have to go in and undo that all the time. It used to always make it dissolve or smart animate or something else. And oftentimes with buttons, I like to just have instant, especially on a hover. I like to have instant be the thing. So if we connect this one, I just went ahead and connected this one, and you'll see by dragging that connecting line, it knows what we're trying to connect to, so we didn't have to go fill all this out like I just showed you guys. We didn't have to do that. It goes, okay, you're dragging to here, I know what you want. I'm going to give you instant. So now what we'll do is let's go ahead and drag an instance of this button, just so you can see this. We'll drag an instance of this, whoops, and let's get an actual instance of it and not make another interactive connection, but let's get an instance of the button and let's put it here on the button menu. Let's go ahead and turn our grid back on so I can remind myself of how we had things aligned, and I believe we were aligning things to this first column, and then I want to say that we were aligning things at 40 pixels down if I recall. So 104 from the top. And we're 104 from the top. So what I'm doing here also, just so you guys know, I just started using this without telling you. What I'm doing here is anytime you have an element selected on the Figma stage in a frame or wherever it is, if you press the option key and roll over something else, it will give you the distance between those elements. In this case, since there's nothing else on the page, or on the frame rather, it's just giving us all of the distances where that button is sitting within inside of the frame. So that's a very handy tool to see your spacing and padding things and that type of thing, is if you just hit option on the Mac. Again, I'd like to be able to tell you what it is on the PC, but I'm not sure. It's something similar on the PC. It's one of your like control option. It's one of those. It might be control on the PC, but if you just hit that button with something selected and start to roll over the elements around it, it will start to give you measurements to and from those elements. So that's a very handy sort of a thing to know about. Now the reason I put an instance in here is because now we can actually play this frame. So if we select this frame, we can go up here and we can say play, and we're going to check out this frame, and we should be able to see our hover instance work. Okay, and it's not working. So we'll leave this playing here. Let's go over here and see what we've done wrong. Oh, it's on click. So we accidentally selected on click here. So let's change this to while hovering. So we'll do that. Let's double check this other one and just make sure that's not click, and it is. So apparently click is its default state. I thought maybe it would see that we were working with a button here or something. I'm expecting Figma to be too smart for me, I guess. It typically is and typically surprises me. So change both of those to while hovering, so the action will be while hovering instead of click. And now if we go back over here to our playing buttons page, we should see that function, and we do. Now we're not getting a mouse cursor here because we haven't actually linked this button to anything yet, so we're not getting a mouse cursor here. But if we linked this button to a different page, we would get a mouse cursor when we rolled over this. So that's a really sort of super basic intro to interactivity, but you can do all kinds of stuff with it. It's you know, once we get in, I'm going to just sort of keep taking you guys along and getting you into more and more advanced things, and we'll start building more and more advanced components, more and more advanced interactions, and you'll start to really get a handle of all that you can do with these things. But you can do lots of really cool stuff with interactive. If we go in here and we look at the interactions drop down here, like I said, you can see while pressing, key and gamepad, on drag, on click, on drag, you can do some really interesting things with. And I'll probably show you guys how to do some fun things with that as we move along. There's mouse enter, mouse leave, mouse down, mouse up after delay. You can do all kinds of stuff in here. You can get pretty tricky with it the more that you get familiar with this, and the more that you start to understand how these interactions work. You can start to really hack together some super realistic behaviors. So for the time being, let's just go ahead and throw some instances here, because if this were a design system I was building, I would throw a few different instances of this button on the stage. And again, you know, I can check and make sure I'm aligned to the grid here. I would probably throw a few different instances of this on stage, because I might want to do some write-up. You know, if I was let's go ahead and grab an instance of this, and again, we got to be careful. So if you're having problems with that, if you're seeing that things are trying to connect on an interactive level, that just means that you're still in the prototyping menu over here. So if you just switch back to design, it will stop doing that. It will stop trying to make those connections for you. So that's something that was a little tricky for me at first, coming from different tools, is having to remember to switch back and forth between design mode and prototype mode. And then you've got this little inspect panel over here that gives you all kinds of information too. So just remembering to switch between these modes is you know, something to get used to, and you know, it just kind of becomes second nature as you start to do it more and more. But if we were doing an actual design system here, you know, we'd probably want to do, you know, we might want to bring this out, and we might want to, you know, we might want to align these things to the grid, and we might want to do some sort of a write-up on these buttons or whatever. So what I would do is I would drag these out, I'd have enough of these on stage that I could show my different states, and then I might go in here and might say, okay, I want both of these to be my hover state instead of default. I want both of these to be my on state instead of default. And then I might put some kind of write-up around them, you know, like, you know, we might want to come over here and select, you know, one of our text elements here, or probably like, you know, like maybe body medium, we want to put over here. And we might want to do some kind of a write-up here. All right, so once we've got this placed, you know, we might want to say on state, or sorry, let's say default button state. So actually, we can just go ahead. I'll show you guys how to do all this with auto layout as we go forward too. I'll do a more advanced video on auto layout and show you how to use auto layout to lay out your entire page. We're just not there yet, so for the sake of this, I'm going to keep this really easy. I would make, here's my default button state that I'm documenting for the team, and I'm saying, okay, this is your default button state. This is what it looks like. You might want to write something about the padding and spacing rules or the usage rules or whatever in there. Then you might want to say, hover button state, and again you might have some explanation here explaining the different hover states. We'll select both of these and now switch this to hover over here in our states, and then we'll go ahead and we'll duplicate this down again, and then we might want to say on button state or something. I don't know. You can document this however you want to document this, but I'm just kind of trying to give you an idea of what this might be like in a real world scenario. You'd lay this out in some manner, and then you'd start to document, all of the different things that you have, and you'd want your team to be able to see. Now, your team is probably going to be comprised obviously of other UX, UI folks, and they're probably going to be in here actually looking at your raw file. They're probably going to be looking at this. So you would only do this for anything that you want sort of public facing, or the documentation might be for your team too, but they're going to come in and look at it in this state, right? They're going to come in and look at your sort of at your Figma file. They're not going to try to view this in prototype mode. But I just like to do this again so that I have like a public facing version of my design system, so that I can send executives or my boss or people who don't necessarily know Figma and don't want to have to know Figma. And so now you can see, because we have the hover state on this first button, the hover state still works and it's still active. But here, this button doesn't do anything. This is our hover state. This is our on state, which we haven't wired up to do anything. So these aren't going to actually be active unless we were to make them active in some manner. So that's kind of a really sort of basic introduction into interactivity. You can do quite a lot with it, and you can get yourself in trouble with it a little bit. You can get a little over the top with it when you're building out components. You kind of need to be careful, because I have found myself at times building overly complex components that are very difficult for the team to use, and we've kind of recently started trying to scale back our components a little bit and make them a little simpler and give the team a little bit more of an atomic approach, where we say, okay, here's all the atoms that you need to make up your molecules. Here's all the molecules that you might need to make a, and so we're kind of taking that sort of atomic approach where we're saying, okay, here's all the constituent parts. We've built a basic component for you. And if you want to use that component, great, but you can also use these constituent parts to build your own custom components. So we're kind of taking that sort of atomic approach with our design system currently, and I definitely recommend that as sort of a, as the way to go for the most part. But you do want to save your team time and effort wherever you can, like building in this rollover state for them. That's a no-brainer, right? They're going to need rollovers on their stuff, and rather than just trying to educate them on what the rollover should look like, or trying to make them look at this documentation every time, it's easy to just wire that up for them and allow that to be active for them. So I think this video is probably about, let's see, it looks like we're at about 20 minutes now, so maybe we'll go ahead and cut this one here and just call that an intro to interactive. And then we'll get into more advanced versions of this stuff as we go along. I'm going to start sort of ramping things up a bit here. We're going to start making the assumption that if everyone's like watched sort of, you know, all 4 of these videos at this point, or all 5 of these videos, however many I've done at this point, I can't remember. But we're going to assume that if everyone's come along for this ride up to this point, that we're ready to start kind of stepping up the advanced nature of what we're doing here, and we'll start to get into some more complex things and just start showing you how to use this stuff in a more complex and more advanced way. So I think in the next one, let me figure out what we're going to do for the next one, but for the time being, I hope that was helpful, seeing a sort of a nice little introduction into how interactive works. And then in the next one, we'll start to step all this stuff up. We'll start to piece all this together and start to make sense out of all of these things, and start getting more advanced with our components, start getting more advanced with our auto layouts, start getting more advanced about all of this stuff, and just take it to the next level. So we'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks so much. Cheers.